Midway through the dialogue, Phaedo, a Platonic dialogue on the immortality of the soul, the narrative of which is set in the moments directly leading up to the death of Socrates. Socrates makes a claim that can strike us as odd at first. He has been unjustly convicted of impiety, unrighteousness, unholiness, and of corrupting the young men of Athens, and will shortly be compelled to drink hemlock, and so be put to death. At a crucial moment in the dialogue, when his young followers are in danger of losing all hope, Socrates says that they must avoid the greatest evil that can befall a human: misology, the hatred of the logos, or put another way, the hatred of reasonable discussion. And he says this: There is no greater evil one can suffer than to hate reasonable discourse. Misology and misanthropy arise in the same way. Misanthropy comes when a man without knowledge or skill has placed great trust in someone and believes him to be altogether truthful, sound, and trustworthy. Then a short time afterwards, he finds him to be wicked and unreliable. And this happens in another case, when one has frequently had that experience, especially with those whom one believed to be one's closest friends. Then in the end, after many betrayals and such blows, one comes to hate all men and to believe that there is no one reliable in any way at all. Have you not seen this happen? Socrates asks. And I think we have all seen this happen, this hatred of others, this hatred of people that are actually just like us and it seems like they should be trustworthy, but we've seen it happen in countless leaders. We've seen it happen in communities. We see it happen with friends. And Socrates talks about both kinds, right? When you put your trust in some great leader and then there's a scandal. What are they all doing? Apparently there's no knowing who you can actually trust. It happens with a friend. In the lower school, this happens with friends on a regular basis, right? I just was meeting with a student a couple days ago, and he said, so-and-so and I are not friends anymore. And I said, oh, when did that happen? And he said, oh, yesterday. And I was like, were you friends before that for a long time? And he said, yeah, for like a week, but a couple weeks ago he was being really mean to me. And I was like, okay. 2 days later, the same student was in my office talking about something that happened with another student, and I said, well, who can you hang out with aside from this other student? He said, oh, the student that had not been friends 3 days ago. And I was like, so you're friends now? Yeah, we had a good talk. And I was like, okay. Fortunately and unfortunately, we adults don't bounce back quite that quickly. If a friend betrays us, it's usually the kind of thing that rather than creating a conversation later that we can talk and make up, it's usually the kind of thing that creates resentment, the resentment that leads to misanthropy, the hatred of others. We recognize this sentiment in ourselves. We just had Super Tuesday. In 2020, we seem to live in the era of misanthropy. And it's a great evil, one that can keep us from seeing the image and likeness of God in those around us. But remember that Socrates began by saying that it is misology, a word that nobody uses. It is misology, the hatred of reasonable discussion, that is the greatest evil that can befall a human, not misanthropy. He uses misanthropy by way of comparison, but misanthropy is not the greatest evil. How can this be? Socrates goes on to say, the similarity between misology and misanthropy lies rather in this. It is as when one who lacks skill in argument puts his trust in an argument as being true, then shortly afterwards believes it to be false, as sometimes it is and sometimes it is not. And so with one argument and then another. And you know how those in particular who spend their time studying contradiction and logic in the end believe themselves to become very wise and that they alone have understood that there is no soundness or reliability in any object of any argument, but that all exists simply fluctuating to and fro, up and down, like the Straits of Euripus. Now, the Straits of Euripus is a narrow strait on coastal Greece that was infamous for wrecking ships, right? High winds and high waves in a narrow strait. It fluctuates up and down as in the Straits of Euripus and does not remain in the same place for any time at all. And it would be pitiable, Phaedo, Socrates says, when there is a true and reliable argument, and one that can be understood, if a man who has dealt with such arguments as appear at one time true and at other times untrue should not blame himself or his own lack of skill, but because of his distress, in the end gladly shift the blame away from himself onto the arguments, and spend the rest of his life hating and reviling reasonable discussion, and so be deprived of truth and the knowledge of reality. I think even if we have all been listening very closely, it's still a little strange to say that misology, the hatred of discussion, is the worst thing that can happen to you. But let's take a moment to consider what it is. When I hear Socrates' description of misology, I am immediately reminded of the general state of cultural discourse that we find ourselves in today, the public training ground for our students. A climate marked by jargon, slurs, polarizing rhetoric, and sweeping condemnations is surely the breeding ground for misology if there ever was one. Add to all that the vicious noise that is more present in our daily lives via social media, and things look bleak indeed. Cultural analysis easily falls into one of two errors: concluding that the time that you live in is the very best of all possible times, or on the contrary, concluding that it is the very worst of all possible times. Whatever the virtues or vices of a particular time happen to be, and we need to take them seriously, but whatever they happen to be, neither of those judgments is very likely to be true, given the scope of human history. And yet I can't help but believe that we find ourselves in the cultural environment that makes misology more likely and more prevalent than any other I can think of as a student of history. And if Socrates is right, that puts us and our students in great danger of what is apparently, according to Socrates, the greatest calamity that can befall a human. Surely all of this is unpleasant. Nobody likes that Twitter feed or this post. But what's the danger? Why is misology so terrible? Notice that Socrates is not actually really concerned with unpleasant disagreements or libel, party politics, or the like. And there was plenty of that going around in Athens at the time. Remember, it's essentially political and social suspicion that gets Socrates killed. He didn't actually commit a crime. I'm going to read the last section of what he says about misology again. It would be pitiable, Phaedo, when there is a true and reliable argument, one that can be understood, if a man who has dealt with arguments such as appear at one time true and another time untrue should not blame himself or his own lack of skill, but in the end gladly shift the blame away from himself onto the argument and spend the rest of his life hating and reviling reasonable discussion, and so be deprived of truth and the knowledge of reality. If we're listening closely, we can see that in a masterly fashion, Socrates embeds three very large claims into that last phrase. Not even the last sentence, just the last phrase of the last sentence. And they are this: that real truth exists, that it is knowable by humans, and that we come to know it through reasonable discussion. Those are three claims that are at the heart of what we do at this school across all grade levels. And if they don't sound very groundbreaking to you, which is funny, these are one of those moments where probably if you're here at parent conference, you already think that. Maybe you're not the ones that need to hear it. But it's important to remember that the school is full of students who have been raised in a cultural context, even if in your own home, those things are held firmly to. In the cultural context, none of those things can be safely taken for granted. None of those things can be assumed. And I'm now going to do something that, if this were a scholarly paper, would be really unacceptable. And I'm going to hop around to a few different dialogues, sort of picking my favorite sections that are related to this theme to help bring out this point a little more. In the dialogue Timaeus, another dialogue by Plato about the creation of the cosmos by some demiurge, some first mover, some divine craftsman. Timaeus, the character, invites us to conceive of all that is in the cosmos with the following two questions. He says this: we must begin by making the following distinction. What is that which is and has no becoming? And what is that which comes to be but never truly is? The former, that which is grasped by understanding and involves a reasonable account. It is unchanging. The latter, that which comes to be, is grasped by opinion, which involves unreasoning sense perception. It comes to be and passes away, but never truly is. Timaeus makes a key distinction here. There are things in this cosmos that are really, really real. So real that this world is but a shadow in comparison. Whatever this is, it is unchanging, eternal, and we can only access it through understanding involving a reasoned account, the dialectic in pursuit of truth. On the one hand, there are things all around us, the earth, our bodies, Twitter, that come to be and pass away. They exist-ish, but not the way that the unchanging and eternal things exist. And we easily access them through unreasoning sense perception. Our sense perception is trustworthy so far as it goes. But the problem is it can't actually go very far because it is itself one of those changeable things that comes to be and passes away. What a situation we find ourselves in. Truth, real truth, is out there and could save us from this mess. But none of the faculties which come most easily to us are fit to apprehend it. All of our senses tell us that the world around us is as real as it gets. And that is what we typically mean by the rather insidious phrase, real life. Timaeus hints at it here, and Plato argues at length elsewhere, that we really do have one faculty that can apprehend that which truly is, that we can come to know the truth as it is. The trouble is that this faculty is initially weak. It's hidden and it's inclined in the wrong direction and therefore is easily misled. This faculty exists in your soul, and Socrates calls it an instrument more important to save than 10,000 eyes, for with it alone is the truth seen. This part of you is real and vitally precious, but it is turned by nature in the wrong direction. We naturally trust our senses and focus on that which comes to be but never truly is, rather than that which has no shadow of becoming or changing, the true, the good, the beautiful. And this is where the dialectic comes in. Discussion in pursuit of truth turns the soul towards the discovery of the very real, but as yet unknown truth. Socrates follows this thread in his most famous dialogue, The Republic. He says, then if this is true, like if we really do have this faculty, we must hold the following things to be so. That education is not what the professions of certain men assert it to be. They presumably assert that they put knowledge into the soul that wasn't there already, as though they were putting sight into blind eyes. But the present argument, on the other hand, indicates that this power is in the soul of each already, and that the instrument with which it learns, just as an eye is not able to turn toward the light from the dark without the whole body, must be turned around from that which is coming into being, together with the whole soul, until it is able to endure looking at that which is, and the brightest part of that which is. There would, therefore, Socrates continues, be an art of this turning around, concerned with the way in which this power can most easily and efficiently be turned, not an art of producing sight in it. Rather, this art takes it as a given that sight is there, but not rightly turned, nor looking at what it ought to look at, and accomplishes this object. What is the dialectic? No matter the grade level or the subject. It would be easy to think that since I'm talking about Plato, we're not talking about lower school at the moment, but this really, really applies across our grade levels. And when you read the Republic, or if you already have, you know that Plato spends most of his time talking about the education of the very youngest and how to begin. This isn't a high school only situation. The dialectic is this art of turning the soul toward that which is. Participation in the Logos with other incarnate image bearers. And if that sounds grandiose, which it does a little bit, or as if I'm saying that we walk into every class and say, hey kids, what is that which comes to be but never really is? We do that sometimes. Perhaps I can help us all think of it differently. In our various disciplines, we should be pursuing the good, the true, the beautiful. And the way that we do this, the way that we model this pursuit and dialogue with our students, matters immensely. It matters because our students will either learn from us that these things exist and are worthwhile, even if it's hard, that they are knowable by us, or they will believe, perhaps unconsciously, that there is no way to progress in the knowledge of these things, and that everything comes down to personal and changeable opinion, and so it probably isn't worth spending too much time on anyway. Chesterton's principle that there are no uninteresting subjects, but only uninterested people, is really resonant here. Just as students are either learning to love or hate people in their families or at their school, they are learning to either love the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty, those things that truly are, or they are learning to hate the Logos because it seems unreliable and inconsistent to them. Socrates, back in Phaedo, says, we should not allow into our minds the conviction that argumentation has nothing sound about it. Much rather should we believe that it is we who are not yet sound. And we must take courage and be eager to attain soundness, you and the others for the sake of your whole life ahead of you, and I for the sake of death itself. Socrates is saying this as he's about to die. It is we who are not yet sound. The truth is real. It's fine. It continues to exist. Don't shift the blame away from yourself just because you are not yourself yet reliable. I want to briefly meditate on the term logos, or logos, I guess would be the correct pronunciation, especially as it applies to us as a classical Christian school. We've been thinking about the logos chiefly in the way that it is used in the Platonic dialogues, and I want to suggest that as a middle stage in the development of how the logos is used and understood in the West. Many years before Plato, as our president, Dr. Reynolds, has noted in his book, When Athens Met Jerusalem, it's a good read, highly recommend it, Heraclitus was the first to use this common Greek word in a technical or philosophical manner. It is safest to say that logos was the divine idea that held the universe together. In a cosmos of change, logos gave order, pattern, and form to nature. Put another way, all things hold together, consist, and cohere in the reason and order of the divine word, the divine logos. Plato uses the term in a somewhat different way than Heraclitus, but for our purposes today, I want to suggest that it's harmonious. While retaining the literal meaning of word, Plato builds on this Heraclitean notion of a divine cosmic coherence by empowering the individual to participate in the logos through the dialectic, through dialogue, through reasonable discourse. Fast forward about 600 years, and the Apostle St. John picked up on this very identifiable thread in Greek philosophy and found it to be so deeply true, though it originates in a pagan world, that he uses this term to begin his description of the second person of the Trinity. So essential is Christ to the very fabric of the cosmos that St. John finds that the best word to use to describe him is logos, word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The link here between Athens and Jerusalem, between Greek philosophy and the Christian gospel, has been observed for millennia among such early Christians as St. Justin Martyr, who wrote, "For not only the Greeks through Socrates were these things revealed by reason, logos, but also among the barbarians were they revealed by logos personally, when he has taken shape and had become man and was called Jesus Christ." He also said, "We have been taught that Christ, the firstborn of God, and we have suggested above that he is the Logos of whom every race of men and women were partakers. And they who lived with the Logos are Christians, even though they have been thought to be atheists, as among the Greeks, Socrates, Heraclitus, and people like them." Not only is Jesus Christ the Word, according to St. John and St. Justin Martyr, it is important to note that in his ministry, he tends to teach dialectically. Consider this example of Jesus in dialogue with his disciples. This is taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew. "Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciple, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter replied, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.'" This is the divine Logos in dialogue with his image bearers, the incarnate Word in conversation, and he is showing you that it matters what you think and what you say about him. He asks this question not for his own sake, but for Peter's sake. Jesus knew who he was, but he asks for an answer, and so gives Peter the opportunity to define the church. A true teacher asked him a real question, and his soul was turned toward that which is. It is clear that for the kind of education we are hoping for to take place, we have to ask the right questions. And so it is to the nature of questions that we must now turn. Dr. Al Geyer, the mentor of Dr. John Mark Reynolds, the president of the school, and the beloved friend and leader in discussion to many of us here, said two things about questions that have permanently taken hold of my mind and inform how I approach any time with students. 1, a good question is worth 10,000 words. A good question is worth 10,000 words. And I really wish that if you haven't met Dr. Geyer, that I could communicate to you just how clearly he was not prone to exaggeration. Dr. Geyer pursued the truth to the best of his ability to the very day he died. He would meet via Skype with many of us to discuss for an entire weekend one of the Platonic dialogues. He would do this when he was well into his 70s and early 80s, and would sit there and blow our minds with his insights for consecutive stretches of 10 to 12 hours straight. Often, we, the young people, would tire before he did, because he so loved discussing the truth. And he was not given to exaggeration. So when he says a good question is worth 10,000 words, he could be wrong. I find that really doubtful, and it makes me want to take it seriously. He also said this: the question is not what is the answer, but what is the question? The question is not what is the answer. We are so hasty, we are so impatient. We want to know the answer for whatever practical purpose I need right now. The question is not what is the answer, but what is the question? What is it really? Where is it really going? What is the place of questions in education? What are questions for? And what does a question have to do with me? Does a question come from me or from somewhere else? And if from somewhere else, what place is this? And how did the question get to me? What is my relation to the object of my question? What can questions and answers, what can questions do that answers and declarations cannot? Are questions only for answers, or are answers for questions? Should questions lead to answers, or answers to questions? What questions should I ask? Are there questions I should not ask? If something is unknown, how can I be sure that it is real? Is it something or nothing? How do I know that it is worth seeking? If it is worth seeking, how will I find it? What are questions, and what does it mean to ask them well? How can I ask better questions? In a classical Christian model built upon the foundations of Athens and Jerusalem, this pursuit has always prized good questions as an irreplaceable tool in this art of turning the soul towards that which is real. For Plato and St. Augustine, St. Athanasius and St. Gregory of Nazianzus, and St. Thomas Aquinas, our approach to understanding the truth that transcends this world is facilitated by asking the right questions and following the logos, following the argument where it leads. Rather than a posture of suspicion, this should be seen as indicative of wonder and inquiry, and above all, a confidence that the truth is real and will withstand any question, and our pursuit of it is meaningful and worthwhile. This stands in opposition to much of modern education, and I want to read a passage by another classical educator, Dr. Thaddeus Kaczynski, where he sets up this dichotomy between the focus of extrinsic goods and skills in secular education and intrinsic goods and skills in classical education. He says this: for the secular-minded person, it might be a career preparation, the material betterment of humanity, self-fulfillment, that is something distinctly temporal and material. In this view, questions and questionings are important, but only when they give rise to and share aims at definite answers to practical concerns. And liberal arts disciplines such as logic and literature are a generally good thing to learn, but only when directed towards securing desirable spiritual or worldly goods. In this way, the priority of answers, especially the right answers, the useful skills in a school's curriculum and pedagogy, tends to render other types of questioning as not so useful or obsolete. Open-ended questioning, speculative contemplation, and philosophical inquiry, and those skills that are deemed useless, such as a capacity for wonder or an appreciation of the true, the good, the beautiful, and a grasp of the world as a whole, the cosmos in which all things consist, are either a waste of time or at least a waste of money. A liberal arts education, however, aims at inculcating the skills and habits of mind that are intrinsically good, meaning not just good for acquiring extrinsic goods, such as spiritual salvation or technological progress, good in and of themselves. Although our questions and inquiries can be oriented towards definitive knowledge and right answers, both spiritual and worldly goods, in the classical model, this is not the reason that we question and inquire. We question and inquire, and we develop our ability to do this through disciplined practice in the trivium, the classical three ways of education, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, in reading and discussing great books. And we do this simply because it is good to do. It will make us better human beings. And I seem to have gotten ahead of myself. What are questions anyway? And why are they so important in turning the soul towards that which is? At this point, I usually find that etymology, or the examination of word origins and roots, reveals more than a dictionary account of current common usage. And here we find that question comes to us by way of Old French from the Latin questionem, nominative quaestio, which can be understood as a seeking, a questioning, an inquiry, an examination, or a judicial investigation. A noun of action from past participle stem of quaerere, which is ask or seek. The interrogative formulation is one that inherently invites response. It catches our attention and demands an answer in a way that other sentence types do not. And this is part of what makes it so powerful in relation to the soul. At the root of this linguistic tree, there is not simply a question mark indicating what type of sentence this happens to be, but the seed of wonder itself. Here, tangled in the deep roots and rich soil of a language called dead by so many, are the seeds of what it means to be human, in part. Inquiry, curiosity, awe, investigation, desire, pursuit, examination, contemplation. We ask, we seek, we hope. A question is a movement of the soul towards the unknown. Perhaps this helps us understand the relation of the word question to another word that we still use, quest, and the mythic power that this word still carries, the echoes of knights errant, or great adventures in strange lands, of deep wrongs to be righted and dragons to be slain, of love worth more than life itself, and heaven's own treasures in forgotten castles. Admittedly, this notion might be an easier sell for our younger students than for our sometimes jaded high schoolers. But why should our students not be at least known by us to be knights of an ancient and sacred order, and profound questions, their objects of their quests? The sword of truth is a weapon for them, just as for worthy souls in days gone by. Foul error must be met by them in battle of will and heart, just as surely as by knights in fairyland. And they must pursue the grail of holiness with humility and fortitude. When real learning takes place, the secrets of God's created universe are hidden around every corner, waiting to be discovered by curious and wondering minds. But that is not how classrooms generally feel in the modern world. What can we do to awaken wonder in your students? How can the questions that we all ask, parents and teachers alike, stir up a love of what is real beyond all worlds, an engaged capacity for communion with that which truly is and has no shadow of turning? Questions help us make good questions, help us make progress on important matters. Great questions echo in eternity. They have the capacity to channel our finite minds to that which is infinitely beyond us, the light that shines in the darkness and is not overcome, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Thank you.